Use your outdoor voice.
When I'm done, I'm going to give you my mic thing. And this.
Okay, is that better? Can you hear that, Paul? Is that better? Any better? No. A little better. We will try to make this so that it's better hearing. We're actually getting a new system installed for those with hearing aids, so that they'll be able to be on a loop system and pick it up. So y'all will get hearing aids, because we'll be able to do this better. Thank you all for coming this evening. My name is Cece Coates, and I am honored to serve as mayor of Monmouth. And tonight in the room with us, several members of your city council. So if you want to wave, that includes you, Councilor Monmouth, and several members of the Monmouth Budget Committee, because we're going to talk about some work with the Budget Committee later on. But first of all, tonight, I'm really pleased to introduce, in her fifth day of work with us, our new city manager. We've got Rochelle Roaden to come join us from her previous post as the city manager of Oregon. And Dayton is well known around the state for some of its very innovative programs, some of the work that they have done, for the fact that they have long-time partnerships, much as we do with independents. They have worked with Amity, with Lafayette, various public works things. And so she has those kinds of skills and talents. For those of you eating cupcakes, she has other talents she'll tell you about. But we really look forward to having not only her government experience, but Rochelle came to us with experience in the private sector, as well as working with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Gulf. And she'll tell you a little bit about that, but I want to make sure that you get a chance to meet her formally here and know that she's already made herself quite available to folks who call in or have stopped into her office. And I want to make sure you all feel comfortable getting to know her that way as well. So I'm going to introduce Rochelle and let her tell you a little bit more about herself.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, everyone. It's working. So again, my name is Rochelle Roaden, and I'm excited to be here this evening. In fact, I started my dream job 5 days ago. I come to you by the way of City of Dayton, as the mayor mentioned, and I worked there for the last 9 years. I started there as their city recorder / finance manager, and then 3 years in, was asked to be interim city manager, and then I was appointed to city manager, and I've done that. I did that for the last 6 years. Prior to that, I have over 24 years in finance and accounting experience, and some of that time was with Walt Disney Imagineering. I worked in Florida and California, and if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to answer. Sometimes I get questions on that.
Yeah, might have to turn more towards more, slow down.
Oh, is that better? Okay. Sorry, am I talking fast too? Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, and then I also have I have my degree, my bachelor's degree in business administration from Pacific University. But I've spent most of my career in finance and accounting until I was asked in Dayton to take on that role, and that's when I realized what I wanted to be when I grew up. I really love the job of city manager, and I'm really excited to be here. Some of the career highlights and things that I did while I was in Dayton. One of the first things is the urban growth boundary swap. We were able to complete a swap, and what we did is brought in 100 acres into our UGB to be developed for residential housing and workforce housing. It is the second in Oregon state history to be completed, and it took us about a year and a half to complete that process. Additionally, in the last 5 years, I brought in over $6 million in grants. That would be from everything to safe routes to school to Main Street renovation, as well as sewer and water and streets and overlays. Being in a small city, there's not a lot of revenue, and so the only way to get those projects done is to get grant funding, and so that's what we did. Another major thing that I did while I was there is the project management. I actually managed a bridge project. It was a utility bridge with water and sewer infrastructure upgrade. It's a $7.5 million bridge. And the picture you see here was in May of this year. The bridge isn't completed totally, but it was very, very close. So before I left to come to Monmouth. Let's see, we also did other projects like main pump station replacements and a lift station relocation and a safe route to school grant. Another thing that I'm very proud of is the economic development that we did in Dayton. While I was there, I created a position. It was Tourism and Economic Development Director. And working with him, we were able to work with our major developer in town and started an $18 million historic preservation project, which should be done by the end of this year. Additionally, they have agreed to another $160 million in investment in the downtown area over the next 3 to 5 years. So very excited about what we could do there. Well, I kind of want to highlight some of the memberships that I'm in. So currently, I am on the board of directors for the League of Oregon Cities. I am also the small city representative for the Chemekka Regional Library Service Advisory Council. Before I left Yamhill County, I was an executive board director for Yamhill Communications Agency, which was 911 Police and Fire. And then I also served on the Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation Board of Directors. And I have been a member of OCCMA and ICMA since I became a city manager. So to kind of go more onto a personal level, I wanted to talk about my foundation. And that's my parents and my family. So my dad was a meteorologist for the National Weather Service, and my mom was an executive assistant for Boeing. And we moved around quite a bit because of my dad being working for the federal government. There's my daughter and my son, Bingley, the dog in the middle. And then this is my siblings. So it's kind of a Brady Bunch story. My dad married my mom with 5 children, adopted them, and they had me. And so I just wanted to show this. I think that photo's pretty funny. And then a little bit about my interests and hobbies. So I love to travel. I've been to Paris, and I've been to France, and I've been to Ireland. I also love to go to the Florida beaches as well as the Oregon coast. And I love to camp, and then I also like to bake cakes. So these are a couple of, this is a cake I've made in a cupcake bouquet. And so this evening I baked all the cupcakes so you could try the cake. So there's 3 different flavors, and I hope you'll try one of them. Are they good? And that's really all I have. If anyone has any questions. Wow.
I don't see any questions.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh.
I apologize if I didn't, and maybe you addressed it here. Okay, no. I'm here about children in the park, and I'd like to know what's happening. There's been nothing in the paper. I haven't seen anything on our webpage. There are people concerned, even though you're not hearing much, and in particular, the people that have been affiliated with Western, especially because my husband was the track coach there, and if an athlete came in and saw homeless people across the street from the stadium, they would turn around and go home. And many of you who have lived in Monmouth for very long know that the college is a critical part of this community, and it cannot afford to lose any students. I can tell you that right now. So I don't know how, as the public, we're able to have some input on this. I haven't seen anything out here. I know a little bit about the law, but not enough. And so, hi, thank you.
You're welcome. The one thing I do know is that we have not received the application yet. So that is why there hasn't been a public hearing or that type of thing. So there's more to come, because at this point, we haven't received the application to know exactly what they're intending to do to be able to provide that information. And the main,
Everybody's wondering what's going on.
yeah, so we're, yeah, exactly.
So if I have questions, I could sit those in here, the realtor, is that what I should do?
He may have information, Churches Park has information. Again, when they bring an application forward to the city, then we do intend to have public discussion about it. So we have been taking public comment testimony regularly at our council meetings. We have an open time at the beginning of every single council meeting, and anybody is welcome to make a 3-minute comment to us about any topic not on the agenda. So we have had folks giving us input on that and feedback. We haven't discussed it as a council yet because we can't talk about it until we have something in front of us, and then we will have our discussion in public in front of all of you.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna go get.
Thank you. So tonight, our second is a discussion that I'm going to start with all of you that is really something that has been going on in cities, counties, and school districts around our state. Having folks here whose job it is to, having people whose job it is to bring in more businesses, more opportunities for us to serve people. That's our Community and Economic Development Department. We have to have general administration. An organization of $50 million company has to have
some finance folks, has to have some human resource functions, has to do some work with risk management. And then here in Monmouth, we have our senior center. And again, a service that Salem considered having to cut out totally. That was saved, but these conversations are ongoing. And here's what the inputs are. This is a discussion tonight about revenue. And our revenue is constrained by a few things, one of which is Oregon Tax Measures 5 and 4750. These came about in the 90s. I think many of us in this room were around for those fights. And it went through a few permutations. But what this has done to our property tax, and property tax is the main way we fund all those services you saw listed there. Our property taxes are limited. Each city, each school district, each county has a permanent rate. That is the rate per thousand we charge for general operations. That rate doesn't change. They were arbitrarily established. Ours is slightly lower than Independence. The city of Jervis gets almost twice what we get per thousand, just sort of arbitrarily. And many cities came in with much lower permanent rates. The calculated assessed values of all properties in Oregon were frozen by those measures. And after a certain calculation, those assessed values grow at no more than 3% a year since 1990, which 1991 was when I built my first house. And I was so nervous because it was going to cost $120,000 to build a 2,300 square foot house in West Salem. That property has only grown at a rate of 3% a year basically since then. So that's what they're paying taxes on. Wish I was still in that house in some ways. Obviously, if you've paid your own personal insurance bills lately, casualty insurance, property insurance, those rates are going through the roof. The natural disasters we're experiencing, the risk. And for entities like the city of Monmouth or, frankly, Central School District, where we own a lot of property, those costs are increasing. And of course, inflation. We've got a lot of pressure on wages and benefits. We all are asking employers for a little bit more to cover expenses. Employers are having to pay more. We can lose good employees if we can't keep up with them. Also the cost of equipment. And back to revenue, one other thing I wanted to mention was that in Monmouth, our property tax revenue is also constrained because of the balance of taxable property we have. So we don't have industrial development to speak of. None of us really wants big industrial development. We hear that time and time again when we go through and talk about what do we want in Monmouth. But cities continue to try to attract that because it pays a very good return on property tax revenue. The other thing we have in Monmouth, and we've heard different numbers quoted, is that we don't have as much taxable property, period. We have a lot of exempt property in this city limits. Western Oregon University, we don't get any property tax revenue from that. Schools, churches, they don't pay property taxes, but continue to use services. So those kinds of things make our balance of revenue different than many other cities. Okay? So yeah.
Calculated assessed value stays fixed, but only until the property is sold again. Then it's done at a new rate,
That's not true.
isn't it?
No. Nope. Rich Graham's question was the assessed value stays the same until it's sold. And then the new owner would pay a new property tax rate based on that new value. That is not true. People have talked about that. It's called reset at sale. But so far, the legislature has not done anything to address that. No one has been willing to bring that forward.
So it still goes forward?
So the person who bought my house that I paid $120 for, they are paying 3% a year increase since then on that house. And I'm pretty sure they could sell it for quite a bit
But
more.
it's assessed at a new value, right?
No, it's 3% plus 3% plus 3%, right? So it,
Okay.
yep.
And the reality is that the real market value is growing considerably
Yes.
faster than that. So the gap between assessed and real market continues to grow wider and
Yep.
wider and wider.
We actually, and I'm trying not to take too many questions quite yet. We'll pass around the mic, but we actually have a handout showing you the difference between Monmouth's assessed value and real market value. For the last 10 years, I think we got from the county assessor. Those numbers are published regularly. So these are some of the things we are facing, some of the questions that we are wrestling with. And if that sort of question came up as we were preparing our budget this year. Our interim city manager, Christy Worster, looked at the history of budgeting in Monmouth. We've always been pretty conservative. We've always tried to be very thoughtful, keep some kinds of manageable reserves on hand to deal with inflationary pressures like this. But it's just not sustainable. It caught up with us too, right? So she asked all departments to look at ways to reduce their budgets starting even in April of this year. So we had some budget reductions before our fiscal year ended in June 30. And then Christy and our finance director, Susie Marston, brought some difficult choices forward to the budget committee. So the budget committee, made up of community members, went through their process to discuss, look at each department, each type of spending, and figure out what could we afford to keep going and what might have to face some cuts. Pretty much every department in this city made cuts, including finance administration. We had a position of someone who was doing our human resources, doing contracting for us, and that position was cut totally. So the finance administration lost one entire person. Our library shifted around some hours and cut, right? Our parks departments. But really one of the biggest cuts, and you'll find out why, was in our police department. We looked at not filling one vacant position, not adding an officer we had hoped to add, and to cut the hours of our community service officer, who actually does low-level code enforcement, works with folks who maybe have struggles keeping their properties up, or there's some small violations that really don't require our folks, our uniformed officers coming out. We've had to cut back on that. So that brought up a discussion among the budget committee, as I said, many of them are here tonight, about what could we do to restore those vital services. So we had our budget meetings, and one of the things that came forward was this concept of a public safety fee. The budget committee voted unanimously to have the council consider it. The council held a work session on July 2nd. We heard from our Monmouth Police Department. We heard from our finance director. we talked through what that would do, not only what those impacts are, but could we in fact come up with a way to make our police department whole? And you'll hear a little bit about why, even if we do that, we are not caught up. We are still behind in the level of policing service we would like to give this community. But this is a beginning discussion. At the end of our work session, we decided to bring this forward, start hearing from you, hearing questions, hearing comments about what this would mean and how this might work. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our police chief, Isaiah Haynes, and Lieutenant Matt Olafson. They're going to talk to you a little bit about how we got here. And then after that, we will have Rochelle talk about sort of this budget funding stuff and give you an opportunity to ask some questions just in general about those things. Then Susie's going to talk about what a public safety fee might be, how it will affect me and you and you and you, and get some input from you on that and another opportunity to ask questions. So thanks for your patience. There's going to be some numbers in here and a few of those things, and hopefully we can help you understand. But I would like to introduce Chief Haynes and Lieutenant Olafson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was told I wasn't going to be in trouble if I didn't use the mic. That is, unless somebody can't hear me and they would hear better with the mic. And I am completely okay using that. Sometimes I feel like it gives a weird kind of echo. And so if everyone can hear me now, then this is great. We'll proceed this way. I'll just start off by saying I appreciate everybody being here. This is one of those topics that I'll start with, and I'll just tell you that I wish that I wasn't here for this reason. I wish that we had the funds to maintain the level of service and to keep pace with things. Over the years, that has kind of proven not to be the case, but I wish it was different. I have no intentions of trying to add more than we need in any way. So hopefully as we kind of talk about the things that we do and really our staffing levels and the calls for service that we have, it kind of answers some of those questions that you may have. But kind of start off with, our story. Police we're 24/7, 365. We're an essential service. If you call, even though they may be on another call, you're going to be in the queue and you're going to get an officer. But any day of the week, weekends and holidays, any time of the night, and we're proud to offer that service. We work 10-hour shifts. Our officers are, I'll call them a jack of all trades. They respond to anything from, it could be just neighborly, you have frustrations with a neighbor or something else, a civil type question, all the way up to homicides. I'm proud to say that we don't have a lot of those, but we have those in Monmouth from time to time, and so our officers are trained really well to be able to handle everything in between, and they do. There's a lot of times we get calls for service that when you pick up the phone, you're like, I don't know that this is a police call, but we always, I pride myself and I pride our department that we will try to provide a service, even when we don't maybe have the answers. It's trying to point people to resources, and so that's what we do. Kind of going through, you can see our organizational chart, and for those that aren't really familiar with our department or how we work, but you have the chief and lieutenant who really were the administration. And what I will say about that is that we're a small enough department that even the administration, we can't escape, not getting out of the office. Even though we have different jobs and duties, many of our boards and commissions and meetings and planning and scheduling and policy and procedure, many of those things keep us behind a desk, but we're small enough that you'll see both Lieutenant Olafson and I out helping on calls when it's needed. And so, but we are the administration at the police department. We have a records supervisor and one records tech. The records tech, and I'll just say while I'm up here, she also, part of her position is the evidence technician down here. So she kind of does double duty for us, and largely in part because the evidence technician position doesn't need a full-time FTE, but it is a very important job that we need to have filled, and so that was the best way to do that. You'll see here that we have 2 patrol sergeants, an administrative sergeant, which is new, and a detective sergeant. And I'll just kind of explain some of this. The administrative sergeant was new this year. This was not because I'm trying to create a top-heavy department. It's part of, I explained this at our work session. We have a pie, and there's so many ways you can slice the pie to be the most efficient you can with your services. And we have a young department, albeit very skilled and professional in what they do. But we have a young department. It's really important to have supervision in the field. As you know, there's a lot of high liability things that happen, and for us, it's important to have, again, that experience that is sometimes overseeing those calls or being aware of things and hopefully mitigating even some problems before they happen. Our previous structure was one that we had 3 sergeants, and many of them were saddled with the extra duties, collateral duties, and tasks that over years accumulated to the point where they were office bound more than not. And our creation of the administrative sergeant was simply to take those tasks and assignments from the patrol sergeants to make our patrol sergeants be in the field. And so you'll see that although they still do a lot of things, our patrol sergeants are patrol. And so they are in the field and they are handling calls and they are supervising, and that's what we were hoping to do. We have a detective sergeant that oversees 2 detectives and also carries a caseload, and he does a lot of other meetings. We have a lot of partnerships. We'll go through that in later slides, and he is involved in a lot of other meetings and boards, commissions, and multidisciplinary teams. So, part of that, and I kind of skipped on this, we have our current staffing allows for 2 day shifts, 2 swing shifts, 2 graveyards. We have the 2 detectives, and then we have our supervisors. 2 supervisors are in the field, and the other one is carrying caseload, as I talked about. And that's your coverage typically in Monmouth. So out of our 14 sworn to provide 24/7, 365, we have to be really creative, because what you'll see as we go through these slides also is there is a lot of training to have a well-trained police force that we have to do. There's still vacations. There's still officers that go on leave for various reasons. It could be a family medical leave or you name it. They might have a 3-day court trial in the middle of their work week. So there's a lot of moving parts, and we make it work all the time with our current staffing, but it's really tight. Out of our 14 that we have that are sworn currently, we have roughly on average over the last, I think it's 10 years, about 12 usable officers. And what we define as usable officers are officers that are capable of responding to calls for service. As we talked about, when we hire a new officer, it's about 9 months to a year that officer, since we've hired them, it takes about that long to get them ready to handle calls for service. They have roughly 4 months at the police academy, then they have another 4 months in field training, and there's things in between, but it takes a long time to get an officer on the road. And so you'll see that on average, we have about 12 usable officers per year. So we make all this happen with 12 usually. So our philosophy, and I think many agencies have this philosophy, but really no call is too small. And that's the expectation that I have at Monmouth. And I hope that we can continue that. And what that means is kind of what I talked about before, that when you call, you talk to an officer, and even if they can't help you directly, that they're hopefully providing resources and pointing you in a different direction. So that's currently how we operate. And we're asked to do a whole lot. In today's ever-changing landscape that is law enforcement, we are, I would call our officers, they're mental health, not professionals, but they're trained in mental health calls. They are homeless liaison. We're mediators, we're counselors, we're sometimes parental figures or big brothers and sisters, in the community. And we do that because we can, and because that's the way that at least Monmouth has been since I started an officer, and I hope that it continues to be that way. And I guess I just wanted to relay some of those things that are important to me. As we get into Lieutenant Olson, training.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Olson's going to talk about training here.
So part of my job is I'm in charge of our training at our police department. I'm also in charge of our policies, procedures. And you'll see we pride ourselves on, we put a lot of effort into making sure that our guys are trained to do their job. One thing we didn't probably mention, but we'll probably talk about is sometimes they find themselves, they're the only patrol guy out here on the road covering a shift. Right now we have one on patrol. And so they have to be well trained. Just so you guys get a kind of an idea, some of the annual maintenance training that is required for a basic police officer that DPSST, Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, requires of an officer is annually they have to have 8 hours of use of force. Annually they have to have 1 hour of ethics. In a 3-year span, they have to have 3 hours of equity training, 2 hours of airway circulation anatomy and physiology training, 3 hours of mental health crisis intervention, plus 84 additional hours. So that's just in a 3-year to maintain their certification. We like to make sure that they get that training and some other training as well. Part of your leadership certification, you have to have all the same, plus an additional 24 hours of a leadership training within that 3-year span. Specialized training, as you saw our organizational chart, right? We have a whole bunch of specialized positions, detectives, investigations, right? Our CSOs, our evidence tech, our record staff, our leadership. Some of the training, just so you guys are aware of some of the stuff we've done just this year for our officers and staff have trained on. We've gone to a detective academy. Newly hired detective came in. He went to a week-long detective academy. First one we've been able to send to since I've been here, I think. Maybe one other. Supervisor Leadership Academy, interview and interrogation, tactical street crimes, crisis intervention, or critical incident management, strangulation investigations, report writing, peer support crisis intervention, which I believe at this point we have one officer left to go to the 40-hour course, which is something that we're very happy about. Internal affairs, that was a fun one. Public records, threat assessment, child and infant death investigations, Northwest Leadership Seminar, the Red Door Project, ORPAT Instructor School, digital evidence collection, Intoxilizer, executive leadership training, and many, many, many more that we've done online. So as you can see, when he paints the picture of we're asked to do more. Well, this is just a little piece of what we've done already this year, and we continue to try to get those guys that specialty training to be the well-trained officers. Some of the multi-agency training, we have a very good partnership with our Polk County teams. Some of the things we've done, active threat training with local agencies, the fire department, schools. We got to do a really good event over at the school district this year. Currently working on a tabletop exercise with the fire department on how to respond to individuals suffering from mental health crisis. It's something that is ever-changing in our career, in our field, and we're trying to work the best we can with the fire department because we're both struggling with it, right? So we're going to go through a tabletop exercise here in the next month, hopefully. Some of the most recent case law updates. As you can imagine, things change. When I started 19 years ago, it's not the same policing that it is now. You know, some of the recent law updates that we're playing with and trying to figure out is the revision of Ballot Measure 110. That changed the way we policed. Now that is being revamped, but what we're seeing is many of our police officers haven't worked in a time where drugs were illegal, right? So we're now having to retrain them. There's a lot of case law. There's a lot of issues that come out with search and seizure when it comes to that stuff. So we have to retrain all those guys on that kind of stuff. To include House Bill 4002, which is the deflection program. We're part of a committee throughout Polk County that is working on what that looks like for Polk County, because that's something that's going to be out there that, you know, we don't want to criminalize addiction. So how do we make that work for our county, right? And then even as of last month, Grants Pass versus Johnson, which I'm sure a lot of you have researched, the Supreme Court ruling on homelessness, really, and taking into account how that ruling has affected our city ordinances and how we move forward with that. With the House Bill 3115 that requires regulations be reasonable. So there's things that we are constantly changing, right? And we have to stay up on that kind of stuff. So it keeps us very busy. But it's very important, right?
You'll have to bear with me. There's things that I'm going to read off, and it's for no other reason to show, again, our partnerships that we have that are many. And one of the things that, I sat in an interview panel today, and, one of the things that was brought up was, what's the most important thing in your job? And I'll tell you that by far it was relationships. It's who do you have relationships and how can you leverage those relationships, especially in a time of need. And so we do that. And I think that we're good partners in our community. Some that we are a part of is Western Oregon University. We sit on several boards over there. The Wolves Against Interpersonal Violence. We help with commencement. We do job fairs there. We're part of the Lear board through Shemeketa. With the Central School District, we've been part of their CTE, law enforcement CTE program, and career exploration class. The CTE, I already said that, safety response protocol. We just, one of our Transportation Commission members really planned and organized, and we were part of the bike rodeo, which is for bike safety in Monmouth, which is great. With Polk County, the list is too long for me to list off all the things that we're a part of with Polk County, but to name a few, we're on the Polk deflection team, peer support, several different MDTs, multidisciplinary teams, threat assessment, sexual assault response team, and the list goes on. With behavioral health, the sequential intercept model, action planning, crisis intervention steering committee, we're on the homeless services group. We help with the 4th of July. I think one of the most visible things, your police department, one of the big responsibilities we have is really it's for planning and it's overall safety. So the events that I'm happy to have here, many of them require a different level of safety, and it's planning, it's operational planning, it's making sure we have our pieces where we need them, and that we've thought about the threats that could happen. And so 4th of July and those kind of things take a lot of manpower and staffing. We're also proud to do things like Shop with a Cop, be a part of the Christmas parade, back to school bash, canned food drives, holiday gifts. Our officers have done that for many years, kind of adopted families in need and out of their own pockets donated, whether it be gifts and food, and deliver those things on Christmas. So I'm happy to say that our department is well connected and well-meaning, and they are your definition of public servant.
So now we're going to get into a little bit of the data, right? What supports what we're talking about? We've been tracking data for the last 19 years, but really since 2014. We went back 10 years. What does this data show us? Some of the things that we like to capture to kind of paint the picture is calls for service. What is calls for service for us? What we did is we use a computer-aided data dispatch system with WVCC. And every single call that comes in, whether it's through our record staff or through 911, gets entered into a CAD system. Okay, so we took that CAD data and we minused whatever self-initiated activity was out there. What we use for self-initiated activity are traffic stops. They're field interviews. So we go out and talk to an individual out in the street. We took out some of the area checks or some of the vacation home checks, some of our premise checks when our guys go walking around the park, around some of the businesses at night, making sure that things are happening. That's our self-initiated activity, right? That's for when calls are generated in the CAD system. That doesn't equate to us sitting in an intersection watching traffic, but it's just the calls that are generated.
A lot of times I'll say with self-initiated, and I apologize to interrupt, with self-initiated, you can also think of self-directed time. So when an officer has downtime, and maybe we've had complaints, for speeding cars or vehicles or people blowing stop signs in certain areas, that's the time that they can go sit in those things and try to provide some enforcement. And so, I apologize for cutting you off there.
You're good. So what that equates to is once we subtract the self-initiated activity, that brings us to really calls for service. It's the best way, most consistent way that we've tracked it over 10 years to try to get the best picture here. As you can see, as time has gone on, we've increased from 2014, 5,914 calls for service to 2023, we're at 7,494. And we project that based on the 6 months that I've already looked back to increase for obvious reasons. One other thing that we've looked at is I started calculating time on call. That's a very difficult thing to track. Our dispatch CAD system works, as some know, only to a certain point, right? So if I go out on a call, I'm dispatched on that call. When I clear from that call, I clear from it, okay? What that doesn't equate is all the time that we have to go back to the office, write a report, we have to collect evidence, we have to process that evidence, we have to go to jail, we have to do a lot of different things are added onto that that maybe aren't tracked as accurately. So what you'll see is a call for service on average over several months is about 27 minutes on average from I go handle a ordinance violation to I am on a DOA, what we call dead on arrival, right? So it's somebody that's passed away. Probably not the best example, sorry. And a self-initiated activity, so traffic stops, area checks, premise checks, those on average take about 9 minutes. So, but that includes your quick stop for speeding, go out to the park, I stop a car and arrest them for DUI, I have to go to the jail. So you can see where that expands. So about 9 minutes. So with that being said, you can kind of see the more time we spend on calls, the less time we're able to do self-directed or self-initiated activity. And you'll kind of see some of the stuff that's causing issues with that. This graph, I'll just explain it real quick, and then Chief Haynes will touch bases a little bit on it. So what you'll see in red is based on the Portland State University Research Center, which is where we got our population counts over the last 10 years, where our population has been estimated, right? So in 2014, we were at 9,620. In 2023, they had us estimated at 11,019. Obviously, 2024 hasn't come out yet. That'll come out in the next year. What you see in blue is our officer FTE. So in 2014, we were at 13. 2017, we got to 14. 2023, we were actually at 15, but we elected not to rehire that position because we knew what was coming, right? And then in 2024, we decided, or this is where we currently are at, correct? You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, what I would touch on is there are estimates for what the national average for officers per 1,000 should be. Now, I will say this. I don't fully always believe in those because I think that the officers per 1,000 should really be what your community needs and to provide a certain level of service. But just for sake of explaining this, the national officers per 1,000 is 2.31. There is also a state officers per 1,000, which is about 1.46. Monmouth currently is at 1.27. And I will say that as you kind of see the graphs, the way that I kind of judge where I believe is the chief law enforcement officer that we need is really how can we provide the same services that we've just talked about at the same high level and maintain those things before they start dropping off. And I can tell you that, one of the things that drops off, and I get a lot of calls about that, but it could be, it's the traffic enforcement scenario. It's hey, I've got a lot of speeders in my neighborhood. I've got a lot of people blowing the stop sign. I can't always send somebody over there, and that's just the reality. We do the best we can, and we will continue to do the best we can, regardless of what happens from here forward. But I will say that you start seeing that, and I see that when I can't be as responsive to somebody's concerns or complaints. That's when I know that we need to start looking at something else, and that's kind of where we're at. And so, go ahead, sir.
Those numbers on the right, does that include Western?
Is what?
Does that include the students at Western?
No? I would have to ask Phyllis.
Yeah, I don't believe so. The Portland State University Research Center, the ones that compiled all this data over the years, I don't believe adds that into their estimates.
Oh, if they say they reside in
Right.
Monmouth, so if they give their home address to somewhere else, that's not counted in our population. But students who live here 9 months even out of the year, but some live year round, so it does include many of them.
But you do see a big difference in the summer with fewer students.
But that doesn't count the population.
Well, I worked on the census this last year on the follow-up for people that haven't reported. And anybody that lived in that spot on April 1st was counted in that census.
I will, you made a comment, sir, and I think that it used to be very different, that you would see a decrease in calls for service and just overall activity in our town during summers. I will say that over the last 5, maybe to 7 years, that's changed. In fact, I'll even ask the officers a lot of times, at the morning briefing, hey, how was it last night? Are you seeing a difference? I'll ask those things, and usually it's pretty steady. Our demographic and the people that stick around versus not, that's changed over the years. So I would say that overall we're much more steady than we used to be. Going back to the officers per thousand, if we were to be able to fill our current vacant position, or the 15th position, and add an additional position, that would still put us at just under the state average. I can't remember if we have another graph on here that shows that. I will say that of population sizes, this is just pulled out of, again, really the census data. It's a snapshot pulled out. So yes, there are some big differences. You'll have some coastal agencies which do staff different because they have to staff based on really their busy seasons. And so you'll see that they have larger, but you'll see where Monmouth is in right here in the middle, we're the red. And you've got, so all around us, you can see that regardless of size or where they're at, that we are currently the smallest agency of this size town. In blue, you'll see indicated these are agencies that we don't believe have any kind of a public safety fee or public safety levy. We do, in the green, you'll see these are agencies that we've identified that have a public safety fee, levy, or sometimes both. There are many agencies that have a levy, they have a bond, and they have a fee. So sometimes 3. Yeah.
And I'll explain a little bit about this. From the Portland State, again, I grabbed agencies about 10,000 to about 14,000, and then I added Dallas in there just because they're a real close agency. So we got Dallas here with a population of 17,989 and 22 and a half officers FTE. Sandy Police Department, 16 officers FTE, 13,159. Ontario, 24 officers, 12,206. Gladstone, 18 officers, 12,140. Cottage Grove, 16 officers, 11,095. Newport, again, a coastal agency. It might be a little bit different there, but 23 officers, 11,083. Monmouth, obviously, with 11,019 at 14. North Bend, 15 officers, 10,769. And going further down, Silverton, very comparable agency, 17 FTE, 10,660. Malala, 19 officers, 10,335. Independence, 15 officers. For now, 10,274. And Sweet Home, 16 officers, 10,028. And then these little numbers are kind of hard to read, but it was just for us to recall. That's officers per 1,000 in each of those sections. Obviously, we are the lowest, with the exception of Sandy. I believe their numbers came out to 1.22, and ours was 1.27. Coastal agencies are obviously way up there because of their demographics and their taxes and stuff.
Go to the next slide here. So what is at stake? And this is my promise to you publicly that we'll always do the best we can, regardless of the funding we have, what's decided moving forward. We will always do our best. We will always hope to embody the no call is too small mentality. But what is at stake is that over time, as the demands grow and there's fewer officers on the road, there's just things out of all the things that we read and that we talked about on here that we won't be able to do. And that's just a reality. That's not me trying to be fearful or anything like that. I don't know when that day is. I can just tell you that we're starting to see that currently. And so that's largely in part why we're here. I'm not trying to meet a certain benchmark and say, we've got to be at this many per thousand. I want to be responsive to our community and do the best that we can do and provide the best service. I think were we at Susie here?
Yeah, I think we're good to move forward.
Do you have any more questions for these two before we talk about money?
Yes. I'm curious to know if, I don't figure out how to say this, because you work for the state, correct?
Work for the city.
Work for the city.
Yeah.
But never mind.
Okay.
Yes, an easy one.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you talked about the different shift times that your department had.
Mhm.
During the typical day shift, there's such a thing as typical.
Yeah.
That time frame is. How many officers would a citizen expect to see patrolling in the city of Monmouth?
It depends on the day. We try to staff, really, we've changed so many times over the year, but really our philosophy behind how we staff is we try to look at when our busiest call times are and our biggest demand, and we try to staff accordingly. And so a lot of times on day shift, you'll see that that is one of our busier shifts. In fact, what we would do if we were able to have 2 additional officers is we would put them on mid shift, which oversees, the latter half of day shift and the first part of swing shift, because that's our busiest time, is that overlap time. Really at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that's when it seems like we get a lot of calls for service. On day shift, there's days that we have 2 officers. We have on Wednesdays, we're overlapped. So we have 2 day shifts on Wednesday, and we also have a day shift patrol sergeant. And we still do things. We try to be creative. So in our investigations unit, we'll say, we created a hybrid detective position. Well, that position also helps cover patrol sometimes. That's to give them experience in investigations so that when we have somebody that times out or they move on to different things, that they have some level of training that we've been able to do and they fill that role. Well, they're also one of the first places that we pull back. If we need more coverage, they're also going to help cover the road. So we might have anywhere from, 1 to could be 6, depending on the day and who's in that day. But it varies.
Well, I'll add to that a little bit. When I started here, day shift calls were very minimal, and we were allowed to work traffic quite often. What we've seen statistically lately for the last probably 6, 7, 8 years is that opportunity has gone way down. We're just asked to do a lot more, whether it's DHS cross reports or it's citizen contacts or real crime is happening right now. A lot of follow-up, a lot of technology has expanded the time on calls. And we go back to that time on call and why that is. I really believe that that's what's caused us the ability to be out on patrol, which is where we want them to be, right?
Usually nothing good happens after midnight.
That's very true.
Yeah, I remember that courthouse. Mike Riley used to tell us people.
Yeah.
He stole a sheet one time. He said, you guys, nothing good happens after midnight. What are you doing?
Very true.
Mr. Sieber.
How do you coordinate with Independence PD?
Every day. And I say that they're in a very similar situation that we are. They're staffed, in fact, very similar. They have 15 officers. They have a very similar population size. So our staffing is pretty close. On night shift, we both staff similarly, but we cover each other quite a bit, and they rely on each other. We do. So I won't sit up here and say that we don't, but we see Independence probably daily, because if we have a very involved call for service, it's important that, one, our officers are safe, but also that the people that they're responding to maintain safety. And sometimes you need numbers going to those calls. And so it's very common, especially on night shift, that you'll see Monmouth and Independence together, because they may get a domestic disturbance that is more than one officer response. During the daytime, you'll probably see less because usually we have more staffing on during the day, but there's still, it just depends on the call and the nature of it. You might see Independence, you might see Polk County. We all help each other, but it's not something that we can always rely on because they may also be really busy, and it just depends, but we rely on them quite a bit.
Yeah, case in point, they had a major incident this week, last week in there, right? We had to help them handle calls in their city, take somebody to jail for an assault. So vice versa, right? We go to the jail for something, or we're on a long investigation of something. They come over and help us often. Same with Polk County.
I have 3 questions.
Yes.
If I may.
Yeah.
The first, I want to key in on kind of what he said with regards to independence. And this has come up in my neighborhood, people asking, and one of the things is, we have the combined services with the fire department. But we share the services the fire department serves 2 cities. Okay. Has there been, and I'm a brainstorming kind of person, so has there been a conversation regarding the possibility of a joint police department for the 2 cities, much like the services that the fire department runs? As we know, Chief Mason is, either said he's gonna retire or he's right around the corner. So, I mean, you're smiling, so there's something knowledgeable there. But that's a question, is that been brainstormed during this conversation? Yes or no?
The answer is yes. Since I started, that's always been a conversation. I don't know how much that's actually been studied, and I would probably look at the mayor, even for some help there. There's many people in here that have been around here a lot longer than me. I know it's a consideration. Yeah, and it is. I think it's valid. I think that at some point that should be a study. That study, go ahead.
Was that discussed during the work meeting on 7/2? Because I listened to that, and I didn't hear that conversation come up as a possibility of things that, to me, the growing need over the course of time.
I can tell you, I actually have been and heard those same questions ever since I've been here. I've actually participated in discussions about it. It didn't come up this time, and I will tell you why. Today, Independence is interviewing finalists for their chief. I was told that during their budget talks, the question was asked again. Can we save money by combining these departments? I've heard from a couple of folks who have been through this discussion in other communities that when you go through it, it's not about saving money. That's the problem. If this saved money, I think people would really be looking.
But it isn't necessarily about saving money. That might be one contributor. But he just said they work together almost.
We all agree that it would increase efficiency. We feel confident that there could be some increased efficiencies. We feel confident that it would increase opportunities for our officers, right? Internally, it would be a larger department. You could have more training, more specialization. There are some opportunities for equity in our communities, right? If there's one single police department. But that requires counselors, mayors, city staff, and chiefs to all really decide that is the driving force. And while those conversations come up occasionally between those groups, it's never reached something that we really want to look at. It would require a pretty expensive study. Somebody quoted a consulting fee once of $50,000 to really do all the work, because you have 2 different unions, you have different training, you have different structures, you have a lot of different things that would have to figure out what would be the right mix. So again, if it would save money, that definitely would be a little higher on the table, but that's where it's always kind of in the back of our minds, but has never become a community conversation. Okay.
If you go back to the can. Rochelle gave a background of her life, and I'm just gonna say, I came from a Fortune 500 company, 40 years. So numbers, like what the council said, Councilman Lopez said, he's all about the numbers. So I'm all about the numbers. So it's all about, I'm looking at the blue. Did you go out, I know you graph those numbers and those blue, that graph's a little different than mine, I have one more blue.
That's correct. I updated it.
Anyway, so I'm asking about best practices. Did you go out and seek some cities or townships, they're doing it right.
Mhm.
Are we learning from those townships? Are we reaching out and learning best practices, evaluating what are they doing well? You know what I'm saying? To
Yeah.
work within a budget.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, sorry, I have the floor. The last question is, in your, in that meeting on 7/2, you provided information about, the 3% increase for eligible employees. And I'm assuming that's union driven? No?
Was that something that came from me, or was that the finance director?
Might have been in finance one.
Okay.
I was reading both of them.
Okay.
But it talked about a 3%, so on the bottom of the page of that,
I think those might have been assumptions that, yeah.
So those assumptions are not fact.
Well, some of those assumptions are based on us not just, typically, in a city, there's COLAs that happen, for all employees, not just for police. If you just start, also especially in our environment, but really anywhere in the city, there's also steps. You start at step 1 a lot of times, and you can work your way through the steps. And usually there's a percentage increase in between those. Still, we also know that there's inflation. And so every year, the cost for services, just the bills that I pay daily, I don't get anything different, but I pay more for all the things every year. And so some of those assumptions are part of that 3%.
And then, are you going to elaborate on the vehicle exchange process?
Vehicle exchange process?
Oh, yeah.
I am not. He is.
I'm sorry?
I am not. He is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about that, because that's 35,000 per vehicle, 2 per year, and 1 every year.
It's more than that. Yeah.
More than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Really, so, and
I'm elevating the bar.
yeah. Can I'll answer that one first, and you'll have to remind me of the first one that you talked, well, no, I'll go back to your first one. You talked about best practices. We absolutely try to learn from others. I'm a part of different, again, boards, commissions. One of the most valuable ones I'm part of is the Oregon Association Chiefs of Police. And this is really, I'm on a listserv that we get all the different legislative updates, again, best practices, even problems that come up. A lot of times that's communicated out by the other chiefs. Hey, who's doing this for this? So we're always trying to seek answers, absolutely. I will say that Monmouth PD is accredited. And we were originally accredited, I think, 4 years ago. Lieutenant Olafson is just a big part of that. And being accredited means that we follow best practices. And so we are currently doing that, and we are always trying to learn. Many agencies, even that follow those best practices, I will say, are in this same position. And when I say 50, and when the mayor talked about earlier, you can Google search. In fact, sometimes it's really informative to do that on this, because I had the same question. In fact, when we first started, I'm like, how could this be? We try to be fiscally responsible with our money. And I think the best explanation is the one that the mayor gave, is that, the system and the way that we are, the police, the general fund is funded, just doesn't keep pace with the world that we live in now. And it would be a different story if we had, 20 officers and we were living outside of our means. But I think that we've not done that. If you roll one of the graphs back and you go back to 2004, we had 12 officers, and so really for 20 years, we're only 2 officers larger than we are today.
Well, you had detectives back then, and
Yeah.
We have
Yeah, that's all
detective.
sworn. Yeah. Oh, they are.
Our detective sergeant's in uniform right behind you.
What was I just lost my train of thought. Vehicles. Yeah, so vehicles, I will say that it's not an exact science, but what I'll tell you is that really we have to be emergency responders, we have to be able to get from point A to point B. And cars, even in Monmouth, I'm proud to say that we don't have a lot of high-speed pursuits, although they do happen at times. But cars are driven hard. You know, emergency response vehicles are driven hard. They get a lot of engine hours. When they're on scene, sometimes those cars are left running for computers and for all kinds of things, or it might even be that you have a custody in the back seat that you got to keep the air conditioner running, but they just wear down faster. So typically on the one car, two cars, we still have cars in our fleet that are 10 years old, which doesn't seem that old, but for a police vehicle with the engine hours, they are. This year, I had to replace 3 transmissions, and I can tell you that these cars were only 5 years old, but sometimes you also buy certain cars that you don't know that there's issues until there's issues. So we now know that that particular brand of cars has issues with their transmission, and so that's, yeah, we do, but this all happened in 1 year. That was not something that was anticipated or planned for. Yeah, it's a Ford Interceptor. It's the Explorer. So we do try to do our best, but that's replacing all the vehicles. We have a CSO vehicle. We have, you know, an administrative vehicle that's used for travel, even for officers to go to training. We have patrol vehicles. We have, you know, our command trailer. We have our radar trailers. It's not just all patrol cars, but we have to have those on a schedule, because as soon as you fall behind schedule, it's much more expensive.
You have volunteers in your office?
We used to. And the landscape for law enforcement has changed. We used to easily carry a contingent of sometimes even upwards of, you know, maybe 10 reserves. Those days are gone. And I say that, I wish that they weren't. We had 1 reserve for a very long time, and we lost him to independence as a part-time officer, that he can fulfill that. But they're very valuable, but really, as we talk about law enforcement, how it's changed, you have very few people that are willing to volunteer to do this job. And I don't blame them, but that's something that you can ask pretty much around here anywhere. Hardly anybody has any reserves anymore.
Well,
They still have the SALT program in Dallas?
yeah, Polk County still runs SALT program.
Yeah.
I can tell you, as a hiring coordinator, when I started 19 years ago as a reserve, working my way into a position to get hired, it was a competitive process. Now, what I see the trend being is college-age students coming straight out of college, straight into the field. That wasn't seen 20 years ago even. So the climate's changed. It's not as competitive. You still have to be very qualified, but it's not as competitive to get into the workforce in our field anymore. And so the reserve program has really hurt that in that area, right? So if we're getting qualified reserves, that's a rare thing, because they're getting hired already, right? So that's just kind of something that we've seen over the years.
What you're saying, that there's a greater need for police officers turning out or applicants.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yep.
I have one more question about the car.
Yeah.
Do any of the police force take a police car home?
Yeah, they do. And I'll say that the reason for that is that we have many people that are on call. And so they get a call in the middle of the night. Our supervisors all go through on-call shifts. Our, you know, the lieutenant and myself do. I don't take my car home anymore, although I could if I needed to, but I don't. Lieutenant doesn't either. But many of our supervisors do that, and our detectives, because it's pretty regular. If we could schedule our day, we would say that we don't want emergencies to happen at certain times, and we would make sure that we can respond. But it's very typical, and I've having worked my way through the ranks, I can tell you that I've been called out many times during the middle of the night. And you've got to have your gear, and you've got to be able to respond quickly. So.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Assuming that we don't vote this fee through, where are you going to have to cut back as far as services? You listed a whole number of services. Where do you perceive that you're going to have to cut back?
Currently, I'm not gonna try to cut back anything. I think that the picture I'm trying to paint is that we're already not doing as good as we can in certain areas, because naturally there's not the time to do it. And so what will happen eventually is that, what I foresee is that certain it could be committees that we're not as good at partners, and we lose out on some things because we can't send anyone to those meetings. The other part is that is that we just I just completely drove blank on what I was going to say.
While you think about it, I'll tell you, I'm afraid that the service is what's going to be impacted the most. I pride ourselves in what our officers do to provide the service that they do. And just being here for as long as we have, we've seen that service start to kind of get a little bit uncomfortable for what we would like to see. And I'm afraid that's obviously already showing that it's starting to. I'm afraid of what that's going to look like. I won't tell you that we'll make a decision like other agencies where we won't serve from a certain time period. That's not going to happen now. I can't say for the future, but...
And you jogged my memory. What likely would happen, what that would look like, is that we would get certain calls that we would have to say, that's not something that we will respond to.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be more civil type calls, or it could be animal, calls. Those are the things that you would start seeing less response to immediately, because we have to prioritize emergency calls for service.
Well, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
The prioritizing. I've been through a number of those in the business I was at. It's just like, okay, Richard, we don't have the money.
Yeah.
Start cutting back.
Yep.
And I had to make those priorities.
Yep.
Yeah.
Trying to see where you felt the priorities
Yeah.
were for the community.
Yeah.
I'll speak up for,
She's had her hand up about 5 times, and then I'd like to make one comment, and I have to leave because I have to wait for my husband.
Yep.
Ma'am, go ahead. I apologize.
But some of it's been went through, but I was wondering if you can speak to any sort of recently increase, or are you getting more calls?
Yeah. Well, and I would say that overall, I'm proud to say that Monmouth is a very safe community. In fact, for many years, we were voted one of the safest communities in Oregon. I don't know how they calculate all those things, but it has to do with, our Part 1 crimes that are reported to NIBRs as part of the solution. And those Part 1 crimes, are typically Measure 11, type calls. And we had many years that we didn't have many of those. And I will say that, it's one of the things I'm not proud of it. We can't stop everything, but we've had homicides. We've had a double homicide. We had an additional homicide the very next year within a few months. We do see an increase, especially as with inflation, things on your petty thefts and your, we call them car clouts, but, vehicle break-ins are more typical, so in different months, it depends. I will say that our trends overall are that some of our Part 1 crimes are up, and so those are the sexual offenses and things like that. So I'm not going to say that we have these huge astronomical numbers. That's not the case, but there is an increase in those.
Well,
Oh, yes. There is more of an increase in the Part 1 crimes, which are the most serious crimes: sex offenses, homicides, some serious physical assaults, those types of calls. And that's not me telling you to try to spark fear. There's sometimes slight increases, but nonetheless, they are increases that we are seeing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want one observation. We're really one officer down right now. And you didn't mention anything about turnover in your department, but if you had one person resign, I'm sure you don't get someone hired in a day. And at that point, you're 2 people down. So it seems to me that we should be at 15, so in case someone leaves, you're not down at 15.
you are absolutely right. Thank you. No, that's the truth. We kind of briefly touched on it on usable officers, right? When we talked about FTEs and usable officers and what that means. And we did talk a little bit about the training aspect of it, right? So when somebody leaves, somebody retires, it takes us, several months to hire. Then it takes us 16 weeks in the or in the DPSST process, the training, and then more field training. So it's roughly about a year before we see that person usable, right? So it is quite a big process.
Luann's question, another question. So I called and requested your annual report. Only 2018 and 2019 are on the website.
Yeah.
And when I was doing this little analysis of my own, looking at the different various cities, comparative to our size, I wanted to go out because I've been reading annual reports from those cities. I went out to look at yours, and there was nothing there for 40 years.
Yeah.
Can we get those?
Yeah.
And will your report have what she was kind of asking as a evaluation of the type of crime over those 4 years?
Yes.
You still have a comment before we move on to the finance?
The response part to certain kinds of calls, one of the things I've found very beneficial is the community resource officer you have in the community. And having a person like that be able to handle a lot of things where the priority for you gentlemen to go out and do the things you have to do versus what that person is not capable of doing, I think is really beneficial to the citizens.
It really is.
It has been an
Yeah, it really is. I would echo that, and I think that those are things that over time too, that you might be able to even expand some of the duties they do that takes away from, has kind of a different model that they take. Sometimes cold, meaning that they've already happened, a while ago, but cold thefts and burglaries, and they kind of do a preliminary report that maybe doesn't need an officer to respond to the scene. So those are things that our current CSO does not do, and it requires a lot more training still for them to do that. But there are some things that we may look at over time to expand. Mary.
I have more of a comment than a question.
Sure.
I've lived here my whole life, so I've seen lots of things with Monmouth. I was an officer in Monmouth about 20 years ago, and then an officer in Salem, and also been on dispatch agency. We dispatch me for Dallas. Not all the agencies are there, but pretty much everything I'm hearing. I would see this day in and day out. You guys live in a very safe town, right? I want you to understand that and to not feel like, oh my gosh. Yes, crime is going up. It's going up everywhere. Populations are going up everywhere. This is still a safe town. These guys do a heck of a job. For the staffing that they have, which is consistently fairly low, their calls do not sit on the screen. I could work Salem Police Radio and have what we call 2 pages, probably 30 plus calls pending. Not thefts, not car thefts, active assaults, domestic violence calls, active crashes, because we got nobody to go. It's that busy. It's not like that here. I hope it never becomes like that here. That is one of the joys of living in a small town. Like I said, I lived here my whole life. I chose not to move away from this town because I knew what the call volume was like here versus what it was like in the surrounding agencies. I saw it every day. I handled the calls every day. So I'm really proud of these guys, and I can tell you, I'm not keen on the idea of being a public safety. Like, I mean, I'm retired now. I feel the tensions like everybody else, but I'm really glad I'm going to use his first name. I know he's the chief, but I've known him since Kevin's big. Isaiah spoke to it. He talked about he's not trying to get to that high number of FTE. If he was trying to get to that high number, no, who are you getting? If he's trying to find the balance, he knows that the qualifying here is pretty tame comparatively. He wants to keep it that way. And that's what makes this important. And honestly, coming in here, I wasn't for it, but the more I think about it, I always support the police, is what I would say. But there's a balance. Okay? And if you have some questions about the combining agencies, I can tell you what ORS is to look at. I can talk to you afterwards. Thanks. Oh, you got questions? Something I can explain how that works. It has been looked at for many years. Like when 20 years ago, there was discussion about it before I was hired. I remember when that was.
I have a
Polk Metro.
draft of a recommendation.
Yes. So
Bubble was.
and honestly, I don't know that that is that having is not a bad thing for a number of reasons.
Thank Thank you. And we do miss you at dispatch.
I think I had one more.
Jason has
Jason.
one more. That's okay.
What numbers?
Just to echo her comments, I feel incredibly safe in this. Yeah, I've worked here for a long time. A few times I have had to interact with one police, fast responses, great service. No complaints whatsoever on that. As far as the funding goes, this is probably the next segment. Mayor mentioned that all departments were tasked with the budget, analyzing it. My concern is that not all agencies, in my mind, are very equal, and not all equal priority. And if I were looking at essential services, those would be at the top. Water is right as in the budget, electricity, utilities. So if I look at my budget, budget, I've got tax, I've got my mortgage, I've got my city Monmouth. Those are the non-discretionary funds. I can't just say, well, sorry, I'm going to make 5% Monmouth. Mortgage holder is not going to appreciate that either. But I'm going to prioritize things that I value in the discretionary areas, play money, vacations, things that I do. That's going to be at the bottom. My thought is, I'd love to see 200,000 added on to the Monmouth budget and find that someplace else that's more efficient versus creating new fee. If there is things we want to fund with more discretionary, let's have those or not. There's a need for those, but we need to fund our public safety.
Thank you.
So Rochelle.
I'm going to talk loud too. Can everyone hear me instead of the microphone? So we wanted to look at the general fund and look at the general fund appropriation so that you can see, and we've talked about this before, that the general fund, what it funds is management and finance, police, community development, library, parks and recreation, municipal court, senior center, and then this non-departmental, this includes the contingencies and the reserves and the debt payment. And what typically, and I believe we have a directive from the council, that should be 15% of the total budget. And that needs to be saved so that in the next year, you have funding there if you need it. Additionally, because property taxes come in November, you have to have funding for July, August, September, October, and November. We call that Jason. And so you have to have funds there to be able to make those payments during those first 5 months of the year. So that's what this represents. But as you can see, so the budget for the general fund for the upcoming year is $7.9 million. This is after the interim city manager and the budget committee and the council cut $450,000 out of the general fund with the cuts that the mayor had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So as you can see, the police services, they do take, it's right at $3 million of the $7.9 million budget. One thing I wanted to mention, and so cities, because this is happening all over the state, cities are trying to find more revenue streams or ways to create revenue in the general fund. And I just wanted to note a few that, and I believe the city of Salem worked through this to try to see if they could raise revenue to help offset the increasing costs that are hitting the general fund and causing the shortfalls. So they looked at doing a payroll tax. They looked at doing a personal income tax. They looked at doing a rental housing fee. They also looked at a restaurant tax. So, I mean, cities are trying to be very creative and try to find other revenue sources so that we can help fund the general fund and not have to do fees on our utility bills. So I'm going to turn it over to our finance director, Susie Marston, and she's going to discuss the numbers regarding the fee.
I just want to, one thing.
Oh, sorry.
One thing I will use this slide to point out, and thank you, Jason mentioned, where else could we cut expenses? And we did. We cut expenses from the library, we cut expenses from the Parks Department, we cut expenses from the Management and Finance departments. But if you look at this, and if you said, for example, everybody take a 10% cut, 10% of a department that costs us $400,000 doesn't get us very much savings. Even cutting a significant position and other positions in management and finance and the courts, we cut those down. But when you're taking a percentage of a small amount, it doesn't give enough savings. And that's why you have to look at where is the largest expense and what cutting that will actually do, which is give you a greater impact in savings, right? So when you go in and say, we're going to cut the library, it doesn't get you enough to balance the budget sustainably. You have to look at where the most spending is, not where we would want it. That wasn't our choice, but because when something nears about 40% of the budget, that's where you get the most savings. Yeah, Luann.
That's fine with me for that piece, but what is a hard pill to swallow, and for people that are on low income and the rents here are so high, that's grocery money. $9 a month may not seem like a lot to someone who can afford things. That's a lot of money. And then we, got the grant for this building, and that took more money. And we just had all of our utility fees raised, and then the garbage went up 7%. It's nickel and people that can't afford it. And so it's a really hard pill to swallow. And I guess one of the things that I saw, like the car replacement fee, why that would come out of this instead of all the money going into new enforcement officers, and have that out of the general budget. So the money that's coming in can support the people doing the job as best they can. And I understand, I heard the explanation around that, and I get it.
Yeah. Luann's comment.
I'm wondering when the fire department fee is going to come. Yeah. And all these triple little tiny fees is really impactful.
Yeah, so Luann's comment right about the fee, and we're going to actually talk about that next, sort of how that would come up and how that would be levied. We understand. We, believe me, have people in our lives on fixed incomes. We have budgets too. And you're right. All of our utility rates are going up. The ones that we assess here in locally and others like garbage that we don't have control over. We understand those things. We also have been fortunate in the past to be able to offer some kind of relief to folks and things like that. We will be talking about those. And the fire department, God bless them, passed an operating levy, right? That was something they went out, asked voters, will you give us more money to be able to keep our operations up? And the voters passed that. So all those things, bonds. So that one option for the city is to go out to the voters and ask for an operating levy instead of this fee.
Was that considered?
It was discussed, and really a couple of things. One is it wouldn't happen fast enough. That's something that takes quite a while. Independents will be asking for a levy this fall to operate their museum and library.
That's a fee. Correct?
Independence is implementing a public safety fee. That's a public safety fee. Theirs is starting at $20. They recommended $27, and they cut it down to $20 a month to start with. But then in addition to that, in order to keep the libraries and their museum open, they will be going out for an actual levy. So their voters will have a chance to say, we will pay an additional amount of money to keep those non-essential services.
If that's voted down, do they have the wherewithal to say, we're going to close the museum and the library?
That's what they're planning to do. They will have to do that. They will have to do that if they are not able to be successful in their levy. But they chose to also implement the public safety fee right away because they are in dire straits. I'm going to let Susie talk a little. Oh, yeah.
How would it be collected in Monmouth?
That's exactly what Susie's going to talk about.
And also, would it just go to the police department?
Yes.
Would it go across the board?
No. So that's what Susie's to talk to you about. And in most communities that have this public safety fee do put it, you could put it on a property tax bill, but then we'd have to work with the county to administer that. So many cities will put it on their water bills. That's a utility that most cities control, right? They run their own water and their own water billing systems. Ours is going to be slightly different, so I'll let Susie talk about that.
So, and I don't know if you're gonna talk about it, like, we're gonna talk about the term, like, was it a discussion where, it's a 5-year term? Okay. So is there a way that it could not be a 5-year term, like, can they vote on a 1-year term or 2? Because some of the.
Why don't we go ahead, let Susie talk about what the council has kind of put out there as options. And we'll tell you, we did consider a lot of different options that we can talk about.
Thank you. There we go. Thanks. All right. I don't have the loudest voice in the world, but can you hear me in the back? Okay. Better than the microphone. Whoops. Whoa. Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for turning out tonight. Rochelle went over this graph and gave an explanation of, how the general fund is made up and what all the departments are in the general fund that get funded. And you'll remember her saying that the police department is the largest department in the general fund, makes up 39% of the general fund. For real numbers, this year our police budget is 3.1 million. The total general fund budget is 7.9. So that's 39% of the general fund. I think I'll start out by saying we are looking at this over a 5-year period. We don't see that this is going to be a short-term solution. And so the numbers I'm going to be giving you tonight are large, but that is because it's over that 5-year period. So I want to talk to you about what it costs right now, or what we're projecting it's going to cost over the next 5 years to operate the police department. And then also I'll go over what we're proposing the purpose of this public safety fee to be.
Just a minute, Susie. We have some handouts that we can share if you'd like to look at them while she goes through this. And those of you who got handouts from the work session, they have changed slightly. So if you want to get a new handout, we can be looking at the small numbers in front of you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I will start out, over the next 5 years, we project that the total cost to operate the police department, can we go back a slide? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, the one, 39%. Very good, thank you. Anyway, we're projecting over the next 5 years that the total cost to operate the police department will be about $18.1 million. And that includes personnel services, which are all the payroll costs, the wages, benefits, all the materials and services, which includes things like insurance, training costs, fuel for the vehicles, ammunition so the officers can go out and do their field training that they need to keep up on, and also capital outlay, which includes the vehicles and other things like body cam equipment, things like that. Okay, so next slide. So
what we're wanting to accomplish with the public safety fee is a list of 4 items. The first one is to restore, we're calling it Officer 15. So you remember one of the slides that Chief Haynes and Lieutenant Olafson presented, remember in 2023, we had 15 FTE. That included this officer number 15. So we couldn't hire that person in 2023. We had hoped to hire for that position early in this fiscal year, but we did a hiring freeze saying that we will wait till July 1st, 2025. But with this public safety fee proposal, we would like to hire that person January 2025. So bump it up 6 months. Along with that, one of the budget cuts, we had to reduce the hours of our community service officer, the person who goes out and takes care of the ordinance violations. We had to reduce that position by 20%, cutting his hours 8 hours a week. So with this public safety fee, we would like to bring that position, restore it back to full-time January 2025. We would also like to be able to hire Officer 16 in July 2025 with this public safety fee. And also we built in costs to support our vehicle replacement program. So the total cost over the next 5 years, you'll see comes to just over $2.6 million, which is 14% of the 18 million I said we project would be the total cost to operate the police department over the next 5 years. So that is the amount of money that we looked at and figured up a couple of options to present to you. How are we going to get there? How are we going to generate that much revenue over 5 years? So I'll present to you the 2 options that the council agreed on to share tonight. Next slide. The first option, and I'll talk about the methodology, how we came up with this. But the first option is to charge all accounts $9.85 a month with a 3% increase each year. That 3% increase means an extra 30 cents per year about. So to come up with the $9.85 per month, you have to have some kind of methodology. And as was shared earlier, I think over 50 cities in Oregon have instituted a public safety fee of some sort, and not necessarily public safety. All sorts of different methodologies, but what we landed on is something unique about Monmouth is we have an electric utility. And so we landed on using the number of customers that have an electric meter, which is the most representative of our customer base. So where it stands right now, the combined, like residential, all the commercial, and larger commercial, small industrial, comes out to 4,294 meters. So we use that base to divide the 2.6 over 5 years to come up with the 985 for everybody, which will generate the 2,623,820 revenue for the year, which will meet what we project it will cost for the items that we are wanting to restore and the officer to bring in, number 16. So option 2, which is the next slide, using the same methodology, this breaks it out by residential, Small commercial, which they're hooked up to single phase electric. And then we have this is small general purpose and large general purpose, which is a 3-phase. The only difference between single phase and 3-phase is the amount of electricity that is provided. So as an example, the small general purpose are your smaller businesses like office buildings, Subway is one. The larger ones are more like Bi-Mart, Tractor Supply, Roths, those kinds of things, because they have more equipment that needs powered up versus the small business. So anyway, so we broke it down by customer class, which means residential single family, which includes apartments, would pay $9.70 per month. The small general purpose would be $11 per month, and the large general purpose would be $19 a month. This also includes a 3% increase each year to those rates. And with that model, we would generate this approximately, it's not dead on, but $2,623,000 to cover our projection for the next 5 years. So with these two options, when we talked to the council during the work session, we agreed that we will review this annually, just see how it's going, how it's, keeping up. Because we're doing this all on projections. The city does a 5-year forecast every budget season. So we're pulling those numbers from that forecast. Our costs are escalating too. We certainly understand, as the mayor touched on, all of our costs are escalating. But unfortunately, this is a conversation we need to have. Where was I going? Yes, thank you. So we'll review annually, and then this is a 5-year period. So at the end of fiscal year 28-29, which is June 2029, we're going to take a look at this, and it'll at least run through there. We'll take a look at it, see how it's gone. What do we need to do moving forward? So this is at least a 5-year plan to get started. Let's see.
I got a question.
Okay.
I'm looking at $11 and $19 for those large businesses. I guess this is a public safety deal, but now we're down a bunny trail of amount of electricity that gets allocated to these places. So I guess I asked myself the question, I think I know the answer. The police probably spend more of their time maybe on residences. Is that where most of their time is being spent, as opposed to Subway and Walmart and Bi-Mart and the trailer place along the railroad tracks?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
But
I don't have real numbers to tell you, but I can tell
you got a gut feeling.
Yeah, I can tell you we spend a lot of time on retail theft. Tractor Supply, we are there often. Bi-Mart, we're there often. These large businesses do take up a lot of our time. And so, that's why we looked at escalating cost, right? That's why we were asked to look at that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the idea with option 2 is to make it more equitable across our customer base. And while it doesn't correlate exactly with the calls for service, it does correlate somewhat, because as Lieutenant just shared, our larger general purpose. Yeah.
Well, I'll touch on that real quick. Sorry, Your Honor. Sorry, this is the only time I can interrupt you. The only time I've ever been able to interrupt you. Yeah, how many times he's told me to be quiet. What I will say is what we're really trying, and we're very fortunate to have that electric company go by meters. What we're really trying to find is how can we get door to door, right? What is the equation we can get door to door? We looked at many different options. One thing with our water system is we have a differentiation of pipe size going into apartment complexes versus residential. How can we do that equation? And for what we have, this was the most equitable. This is able to get to all the apartment complexes, every single residence door. A lot of different apartments throughout the city at Western, throughout the city, downtown, South Eccles, where we spend a lot of time. A lot of different areas we were able to capture using this model where we maybe weren't in others. So that's kind of why we decided on this one.
Okay.
Which of the three categories under option 2 can't pass on the increase?
Can't pass on the increase?
Yes, onto the customers.
School district.
I'm not asking you, I'm
Oh.
asking her.
Well,
There's
I mean,
only
I would,
one answer, right?
yeah,
The resident, us.
right,
That's
right.
because this is not, I'm going to go on, I'm going to espouse. This is not a fee. You can't call something a fee and make it a fee. This is a tax. And the difference is a tax has to be voted on by the people. A rate can be passed by the city.
Mhm.
And the fact that the other cities are doing this is probably because it's the easiest to do, the most reliable that they're going to pass. You're going to get the city council to do it. A lot easier than getting the public, wherever it is, to pass it. Now, if this is going to give us $2.6 million, the budget is going to be $3.1 million for this year proposed to the city police department.
Mhm.
What's it going to look like next year then? Because you're taking this out, aren't you? Or are they 5% of it at least?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so this is over 5 years. So
Yes.
this generates over $500,000 in revenue a year
Well,
versus,
are you expecting then a reduction in the city budget for the police department then of 500,000 or whatever it is?
no, because we would have added the 4 items, sorry, that that was listed on the slide. So restoring the officer, restoring community service.
Excuse me, I'm talking about
Okay.
next year.
Right. That's what we would be doing next year. So we would be restoring that Officer 15 that we haven't been able to hire for 2 years.
Yeah, well, wait, you're not.
Okay.
What would be the city budget then for the police department, since you're taking these, you're purchasing 2 police officers, a police car, and other, I don't know how much other stuff. So that's not going to be paid by the general fund. That's going to be paid by your fee or tax.
Mhm.
So then that would make some money available from the police department because they don't have to spend it on these items that they otherwise would.
Okay. Well, so if I'm understanding the question right, what would the police department budget look like if we didn't? No. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I'm not getting it.
It's on top of what we need. So if you look at this, so for the next year, the budget would be 3.484 million,
Yeah.
right? So it's not going to say that we need this on top of that to be able to continue to fund it, as well as add in back the Officer 15 and restore and those types of things.
The general fund money stays the same.
Correct. It'll increase 3% in property tax. There may be some other
You're
things
not
that.
gonna take away from that.
Correct.
No,
I think that's
No, right, we're not taking
Okay.
away from that, we need to add into it to be able to fund all of this, as well as those additions that we need, which are the restoring of Officer 15, adding Officer 16, and bringing the CSO back to a full.
Yeah.
And the vehicles that are required when you have more. It's okay, Susan.
The full-time community service director officer is 1 year in existence. And prior to that, it's 0.63%. 0.363 full-time equivalent. And now it's 8.8%. 8.8%.
Mhm.
And this is a 0.17 increase. Correct?
So we're talking about the community service officer,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So right now, the community service officer was 1 FTE, so full-time.
Yes,
With this budget, we had to cut it back to 0.8,
yes.
so a 20% reduction.
Yes.
Adding it
Well,
back adds that 20% back, 0.2.
Yes. But, 0.63%, FTE, resulted in that.
Can I add one thing, Your Honor? So we did, prior to making our community service officer full-time, they were at 0.63 FTE, and they were for several years. And so they operated on 25 hours a week, roughly. Then we increased that to 1 FTE, and then we had to reduce again to 0.8.
Yes.
Are we tracking?
Yes.
Okay.
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 Because,
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't understanding. It predates me, what happened before, so. Oh, yeah.
So I was wondering, with the, grants that you can get and the, budget that will change, maybe not a lot, but it will change. Is there a way to, reduce this cost, reduce the fees that are taxed on, all those, that's not the right word, were tacked on? Can we reduce those fees? Bring it back, give it back to the people for a change.
So of course, we want to look at if there's any other revenue sources that are out there that we could bring in, that could go into the general fund, that we then can use to pay for these different services that we have. A lot of times the grant funding that is available out there is for water and sewer infrastructure or streets, not necessarily a grant that I could use to go into the general fund to be able to offset the cost of this. Something we can look at is police services. Are there any grants out there that may help with vehicle replacement or those types of things, and to help offset the cost of that? And we'll definitely look at that to see if that's even available. So the city is going to do everything we can to see if we can find any other revenue sources that we could bring into the general fund to offset these costs, and then maybe sunset this earlier or when the council is able to look at it.
Or maybe do that through the power and light company, because they tacked on the fees also. So,
Yeah.
It would be real nice to have something come back.
Understand? Yes. Couple more back here.
I have a question in regards to looking at these numbers. You have the number of meters that you want to set your fee is 4,294. What is the projected growth in the next 5 years for Monmouth for development, and how is that going to impact these fees?
Thank you for that question. That's something I didn't touch on. So these numbers include assumptions, as she's just raised. And one of the assumptions is a 1% growth rate of utility or electric accounts each year. So that answers your question?
So are you saying that you have figured in future growth?
Yes.
Okay, and then if that's the case, future growth, when you're talking about population growth, would you not be revisiting this same issue we have right now with increasing our police force to match our population growth and the needs because of, and so it's kind of like a a catch-22 that if you do implement this, then we're gonna be in the same situation in 5 or 10 years, along with all the other added costs to help pay for all of that.
Right, and, you know, by including the 1% growth each year, that's built into these rates, that supports the growth and also supports, you know, the population, and the growth rate for these utility accounts is a little different. It's calculated differently from the census, but the idea is these rates would help support the police department so that they're able to provide the service at a level that's appropriate for the population growth that we're looking at overall.
And then my last question, and I know this is a subject that's touchy and nobody wants to really have it brought up, but I have to because our neighborhood is being impacted. How much of the situation that our neighborhood is facing in regards to supporting our homeless shelter, how much of that impact is happening with this? With the increase of the homeless coming into our community, how much of a workload is that putting on our emergency services and our police department?
Well, I can just tell you kind of anecdotally that we definitely respond to calls for service, you know, related to houselessness, you know, and we do. Anytime you have any new element, and we'll call it a problem or an issue, there's an increase in calls, and that does happen. You know, I think with what you're referring to, there's many things that I couldn't give you an honest answer about. I mean, I think that you're kind of talking, or are you talking about the church at the park? Yeah. I think that the answers that I can't provide is one that we don't have that here. You know, some of those models they have in Salem are a little bit different. You know, this is, I think the what I understand to be the potential proposal involves an already existing building. You know, it's not one that you're constructing or a property. It's not going to be as visible, we'll say. I think that, you know, those potentially the people in those situations may be in different circumstances than sometimes what we deal with and what we have to respond to now as people that don't have you know, housing, and we respond to that, you know, daily. I will say that our officers do a good job too of directing them to resources, you know, and there's a lot of success stories there too, but we don't know. I mean, I do know, again, anecdotally, that there are calls for service anytime you have something new. And I believe that from what I recall, and I think I was at a meeting that, you know, and I apologize, I'm spacing on your name right now, but I've been at meetings with Priscilla, was that too, that, you know, there are increased calls, more, I think, for medical services than police, but those are unknown. We don't know what those will be, but yeah.
You're taxing fixed property here. Have you considered taxing Monmouth's biggest problems, which is vehicle parking? Overnight vehicle parking is free. And if you look down these apartment line streets, solid cars parked there. That is a potential, I would think, legitimate tax income or source. Solve some other problems. Has that been considered?
I don't think we've considered that, but I will tell you that I think the point of even this meeting is gathering feedback. I think there's a lot of things to look at, and one of the things that I will just tell everybody is that there are many different ways to do this. This is what we believed would be our most viable options, and I say that there's a few things that have to happen. Is one, I think you have to reach your best. You have to reach the population, the full population. And, you know, part of that when we looked at electric meters is that typically, you know, the population that we serve and the things we do are tied to meters. It's single family residences, it's the businesses, and it's those things. You look at many different places that institute different types of, you know, fees are related to water meters. when we looked at our water meters, and Lieutenant Olson talked about this, there's about, 30 different types of water meters that there are. Yeah. 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 And so that's the thing, is that you may have properties that have many water meters that are tied to irrigation. Well, we're not spending our time there, so it didn't seem equitable, but there are a lot of different options, many of which maybe we don't have, or we haven't considered, but we have considered a lot. And this, the next part of that is that you have to have a utility billing system that can do those things for you. And I think that there's limitations with our current billing system that we couldn't do that, and so those are considerations that we have as we tried to think about what's the best way to do this and how could we actually bill it.
That one-night parking sticker would work great.
I would like to know if places that normally don't pay taxes around town, like the churches, the college, because they have meters and they have utilities, are they gonna have to pay this as well?
Yeah.
That right there is enough for me to say yes, because I know how much of a drain the college is on public safety. And they don't pay anything for it, which is just how things are set up, same way in Salem. But I think that right there is huge, and that is a selling point for you with a lot of people.
The thing is doable. Because I know that this is a thoroughfare going through here, it's 99, second to I-5, right? And I've seen some dangerous things happening on there that have been close calls. And in the wintertime, we see vehicles sliding off, and that you're gonna have to respond to on the cities, outside the city limits. Is there anything that, and I'm brainstorming because you're asking us to come to this meeting to, to give more feedback to you. Has there been any consideration of putting in those cameras like they're starting to do it all throughout Salem, so that people aren't stopping? I see 3 18-wheelers go through the light at Hoffman Road in the last month. And I mean, is there anything there, again, thinking outside I know that costs money, but is that something that can be discussed? Because we put the roundabout in and we didn't have a discussion on that.
I'll pass this over to the city manager, and I'm going to pass this over to her because one of the first things we met on Wednesday in our first meeting is she brought this up, and so I think that she is thinking about those things.
So in the research and looking at what other cities had done, and I pulled up Salem because everyone knows the things that they were going through, and that they had mentioned that there. And I travel 99 and I go through Tigard and I go through Sherwood, and almost every time I go through that, there's a flash that goes off. Thankfully, it's not me yet. And so we do need to do the analysis on that. And I put in some calls to Sherwood and to Tualatin to see what kind of information we can get in regards to what kind of revenue that will produce or could produce. It's always an estimate. Excuse me? Correct. On 99, you can do a speed and you can do a red light and you can get one that's combined. So we do want to look at that and see what kind of revenue that would generate here. Correct. Correct.
So under option 2, we're paying as a home, in a single family home and paying electric, water, and sewer. Would we be paying that $970 every month for 5 years, or would that increase?
It would increase by 3% each year. Yeah. I would also like to share. Yes, right, yes. Both options include a 3% increase each year.
That's 3% on 970, or?
Yes. 3% on 970 and then 3% on the next increase. It's exponential. Yeah.
Do you anticipate this the pseudo tax likely to never go away?
Well, I mean, as Rochelle shared, and me, we're going to review it annually and sunset it at the end of 5 years. Look and see where we're at. Maybe we get a grant. Maybe we can sunset it earlier. We don't know. But where we're sitting now, this will go on for at least 5 years, and we'll look at it at that point to see where we need to go.
Any consideration to going out for a levy and going to the voters, as Independence is going to do? they got this added tax, and then they're gonna do something on property taxes.
Yeah, that would be a decision for the city council, but it's possible. Yeah.
There is a statewide problem. There's discussions at the League of Oregon Cities about statewide solutions.
Rich?
The only thing I've got to say is, I've talked to a lot of people here over the last few months, and I haven't heard anybody who hasn't mentioned how much the rates have gone up for electricity and water in the last year. And so I'm pretty sure nobody's gonna be happy hearing that it's gonna go up even more, you know, because of this and because of other increases. Yeah, I just don't think you're facing anything very positive.
I think we understand that. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
In full transparency, another thing that I would add, you know, in doing research, one of the cities that I looked at was Grants Pass. You know, and you look through their facts and questions, and they talk about this. They talked about going to the voters multiple times and it getting turned down. And I think it was 4 different attempts that they tried. Yeah, sure, sure, yeah. But I think what it got to for them was that, hey, we have to do something, and I think that that's why their city chose to, you know, enact a fee or a tax, you know, whatever you want to call it. But sure, sure.
Let's talk about basic human value.
Sure.
They voted down 4-H, the commissioner said, they didn't collect the money for it last year.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's gonna go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I understand about the fees, what I don't understand or agree with is the timing. So, you know, COLA for us seniors, that close to 70, that I'm on fixed income. And have you looked around to the people that work at Winco, the people that work at Weimar, the people that work at the casino? There's a lot of elderly people that are 65 plus that have forced to go back to work. Thankfully, I don't. I would like to volunteer though, and I'd give you, you know, a lot of good days. But I think that we need to evaluate and I'm talking to you city council people over here, because you're the one that's gonna vote on it soon. And I want you to hear that 5% increase to stormwater, 4% increase on utility, 1%, $1 increase, your pending decision, recent garbage increase of 7%. And I know you know.
We're sensitive.
I know you, yeah, and that's what I'm asking is, and the mean age of people in Monmouth are what? 50, 60? Not counting students. And like Chief said, you know, we are in a safe environment, and we're willing, us people, willing to get out there and do things to help our community, be our eyes for them. There's things that can happen. I guess, you know, I get this speech in my mind, and I talked to you about it. Steve Gleason gave a speech the other night. He won the Arthur Ashe Award on Courage. And this is what I'm asking you people, to have courage. Think about the citizens and to be equitable, reasonable, balanced. It's not about us and it's not about you. It's about all of us. We're all Americans, red, white, and blue. But we've got a presidential year. What's going to happen? The market is up. You know, are we going to get in a better condition in the next 4 years? We don't know. There's a lot we don't know. But you're willing to do a budget to increase at 3% year over year. And I just can't sign up for that. That's a 1%, sorry.
Yeah.
1% year over year. But the other increases, you add it all up, and it's significant numbers. It's in the high.
Right. I mean, and these are all projections. It may not happen like we have it up here on the board because we don't know. You know, all we can do is our best based on the history before us. So, yeah.
Balance and equitable.
Yeah. Right.
And the last thing is, on your city value statement, the word equitable and the word community are in the same sentence. And again, I'm asking for people that are looking here today, that are watching talked with the and I'm speaking for those that have talked to me about it.
Okay.
But thank you for the work you did in this. I know
Yeah.
that it's quite involved, and I thank you for the work you do. You know I do. I'm your best advocate, but we gotta find a balance.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions? Nope. Okay. Were you going to wrap it up or what? Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Priscilla, because as I said, this is a balance. What services, libraries, seniors, economic development, police, what services do we need and deserve? And what are we willing and able to pay for those? And those are the difficult balances every government is facing. We appreciate this is hard. We were not jumping up and down about it, believe me. In those rate increases, also not easy. But as we all know, all costs are going up. Governments don't get a break. Nobody says, oh, that's okay, you're a government. We're going to give you a hot deal on pipe right now. And these are super tough decisions. This is why we get paid the big bucks as counselors, to help figure all of this out. So like our zero salary. So we really appreciate our professional staff. We rely on them. We are talking to other cities. We are constantly all looking at ways to make this work.